game and goal setting and setting up a business plan to achieve your goals, and having focus and all that stuff. And now what I'd like to do is I'd like to move on into the actual conversational selling skills program, which is what this whole thing is about. So,
yes.
As always, stop me if anything doesn't make sense, or if you just want to, interject something. But the typical sales process that most salespeople use look like what's on your screen now. It's typically a 4-step process. That's what we taught when I was at DEI, working with Steve Schiffman. That's what my observance is with most of the companies that I go out with, watching salespeople in the field. I find that typically they're using 4 steps to their sale, and the 4 steps are open. So you have to do something to open a meeting. You can't just walk in and get right down to business. You have to gather some information. You have to make some kind of a presentation, plan, proposal, something that tells them here's who we are and here's what we do. And then, of course, you have to close. In this 4-step process, there's an objective for each step. Each one of these steps has an objective. Are you familiar with what the objective of each step is?
No, I'm not actually. I mean, obviously, ultimately, we're going to close, but not per step. I don't know.
Right. So the objective of each step in this sales cycle or any sales cycle, I don't care whether you're using 4 steps, 10 steps, 20 steps, or however many steps you're using, the objective of each step in the sales process or the sales cycle is to consistently move the sale forward. Sounds like it's too basic to even be worth mentioning, except I can't tell you how often I ride with salespeople in the field or I sit with them in the office and I realize they're just stalled. My whole goal in every step along the way is certainly to take good care of the prospect, assess whether or not my time is being used well. In other words, is this a real prospect or am I wasting my time? And the best way to do that stuff is to consistently be looking to move the sale forward. I'm always looking for what's the next step, how do I move forward, how do I get from hello to closed as quickly as I possibly can. And the reason I want to do that is because we only have so much time to do what we do, sell, so I need to get through the sales process as quickly as I can without cutting corners, without being rude, and doing all the things I do need to do. But I want to get from hello to closed as quick as I can so that I can either get rid of you because you're not a prospect, or I can get rid of you because you're closed. And of course, when I say get rid of you because you're closed, I don't mean I get rid of clients after they say yes, but I want to move on and put somebody else into the beginning of my sales process so that I can close as much business as possible. And there's only so many meetings and so many prospects that I can focus on at any given time. So the quicker I can either close you or figure out that you're never going to close, the better off I am. So the objective of each step in the sales process is to move the sale forward as quickly as you can. Now, in the typical sale, and by the way, when I say typical, I don't mean necessarily wrong or bad or stupid. Just that this is what people do. The typical sale looks something like this. Opening a meeting typically starts with some type of an icebreaker. How about those Mets? Nice weather we're having. Gee, I love summer, don't you? You golf, I golf. Oh, you're divorced, I'm divorced. Oh, you wear glasses, I wear glasses. You have kids, I have kids. We've all been trained to go into a meeting, look around the room, and try to find something we can comment on that will hopefully establish rapport. I can't tell you how many times I've been on sales calls with salespeople, and I actually see them looking around for something to comment on, whether it's a picture, a piece of art, something on the desk. I mean, you've probably seen the same thing because I know you observe salespeople in the field too, right?
I do, and it's funny. I see a lot of people not doing that, believe it or not.
They're not doing it at all.
I don't know if they know. No, they don't. They don't build the. I mean, but again, the quality of sales folks that you see over in my company are, I can assure you, they're greatly different than what you've worked with. With all due respect to Verizon, but they're coming from retail, 9 out of 10 of them. So I don't think they get that. But still, I've noticed that it does not happen.
Yeah. So here's the thing. You cannot just walk in and get right to business, even though that's what the customer wants. The customer wants to spend as little time with you as possible. In fact, you want to spend as little time with the customer as possible, because if time is of the essence, and it is, we want to move forward as quickly as we possibly can. But the fact is, business gets done better with people that we like and people that we trust.
Right. It's
called relationship selling. Now, I'm a big fan of consultative selling, which kind of goes against relationship selling, except you need both. people, there's a million discussions right now going on LinkedIn about this book, The Challenger Sale, because it's supposedly redefining sales. And is relationship selling dead? Is consultative selling dead? The truth is, it's all really part of the same package. I think you do have a far better chance of closing business when you have at least some relationship with people. And you're not going to start a relationship based on, how about those Mets? Nice weather we're having. Now, here's the thing. If all you've got to say is, how about those Mets, or nice weather we're having, then you've got to say that, because you can't just walk in and say, let me tell you why Verizon Wireless is the company for you. It just doesn't work well that way. It works far better to have something. But in a minute, I'll show you, or in a couple minutes, I'll share with you my idea on how you can establish rapport in a very easy and natural way that works beautifully. So you've got to say something to get the ball rolling, and if all you've got is, how about those Mets, use that. But again, I'll share something that I think is a little bit more likely to result in a better experience for you and the customer, the prospect.
Good.
The second step, information gathering. If it's done at all, which often I find it isn't, then usually it's a couple of very quick memorized questions, something that people were taught in sales training given by their company, or some guy like me came in and said, here's what you need to ask. Excuse me. But typically I find that salespeople don't ask very many questions, and if they ask questions at all, they're typically not useful questions. And the whole purpose for asking questions is because we want the answers to be useful to us, which makes us useful to the customer. We can't be useful. We can't help the customer unless we know what they need, unless we know what they want, unless we know what the situation is that we can help them with. And the only way we're going to do that is by asking questions. But most sales reps don't ask very many questions. And the reason is, in this four-step process, open, gather information, make a presentation, and close, there's one thing, and really one thing only, that salespeople for sure want to do. Do you know what that is?
Close.
Well, actually, it's present. Salespeople love to present. It's almost like closing is the icing on the cake. Now, anybody looking at this would say the same thing that you did, close. And of course, everybody wants to close the sale. But we salespeople love to tell our story. We love to tell everything about who we are and what we do. And this slide that you're looking at right now is actually more to, if you looked at how long you spend in each of these areas, the typical salesperson, how long they actually spend out of the total sales process, most salespeople spend the majority of their time on the presentation phase. And what they're doing, these stars represent little points of light. It's you or me telling prospects about everything about who we are and what we do and how great our company is and how many people we've helped and all the great things that we do. This is known as a product dump, or throwing up on the customer's shoes. Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm from Verizon Wireless. And you throw up all over the customer. And you can actually watch, if you're paying attention, that when you do a product dump or when you throw up on the customer's shoes, you're giving you're just barfing up information. If you're paying careful attention to them, you can actually see them get up and leave the room. Not physically, but mentally, they're gone. Their eyes glaze over. They're nodding their head occasionally, like they're a puppet on a string. But they're just gone because they're listening to just another sales pitch that they want to vomit from. So that's why people do a product dump. The reason that salespeople do a product dump is because first of all, they think that that's what's going to sell. And they think that if they tell everything about everything, let me tell you about everything about Verizon, the corporation. We'll get to Verizon Wireless later on, but first let me tell you about the corporation. There's a million things you could talk about Verizon and Verizon Wireless in particular, but the truth is the prospect doesn't really care about all that.
No,
what the prospect cares about is what's important to them.
I agree with you 100% on that. 100. Yeah. And I don't mean to cut you off, but again, one of your old friend, Mr. Schiffman, wrote a book called Ask Questions, Get Sales. Do you know that one?
I know it. I haven't read that one.
Yeah, I like it because it helped me out. It helped me cut to the chase, and I think that it also, my presentations reflect what I get out of them as far as information goes. Honestly, I don't want to bore them. I don't want to sound like a braggart. I just kind of go in with what they wanted. Here's what you asked for. Here's what we can do to match what you asked for, and then we'll sprinkle on top, I guess, is the way I do it. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but I just think it saves time. You know?
Well, personally, I think it's right, because why would you want to present anything to your prospect that they don't want? Well, you don't want to do that. And why would you not want to present exactly what they do want? So the whole deal has to be, let's go in and, if we want to save some time, what we want to do is go in and find out what they actually want or actually need, and then show them that that's what we've got, if indeed we do. But in this process, what we've done is we've just shared everything, because the hope there is when you do a product dump is that if I tell you everything about everything, that you, the customer, will be able to pick up on the one or two things that make sense to you, in other words, the reasons that you'll buy, and then you'll buy. If I tell you everything, you'll figure out why you'll buy from me, the couple of things that make sense to you, and then you'll make a decision to buy from me. But the problem with doing that is, if I dump everything on you and you figure out why you'll buy, then you know why you'll buy, but I don't, because I didn't ask you the right questions. So you, the customer, know why you'll buy from me if I can just say the right things, but I don't know what those things are because I didn't ask the right questions. And if I don't know the answers to those questions, if I don't know why you'll buy, then I've got to be a strong closer. And if you see that it says 187 ways to close the sale, I'm pretty sure it's out of print now, but there used to be a book called 187 Ways to Close the Sale, filled with closing tricks that didn't work when it was written, didn't work when they were invented. I mean, there's the three devil close, and the puppy dog close, and the assume close, and the my favorite, the Ben Franklin close, which didn't work when Ben Franklin was alive and doesn't work today. You familiar with that one?
Is that where you put money on the table or something like that?
No, although, wow, that does sound familiar. Huh.
Yeah, it does. Somebody told me something. I don't know if it was, and the reason why I'm obviously associating with Ben Franklin, $100 bills. I don't know if that's the case with someone, but this is what you can save. I don't. It's in my memory bank somewhere. I remember something like that.
Yeah, I remember something like that too. That's funny.
What is
the Ben Franklin close is you know, typically you ask some type of a closing question. In fact, I learned the Ben Franklin close a million years ago when I sold life insurance for about a year, which was just horrendous. Everybody hates the life insurance salesperson because, you know, what you're selling is death insurance. But, you know, you get to the end of, you know, a presentation, and of course you're in somebody's home typically, and you sit them in the kitchen because that's the coziest room in the house, and you make sure that they're not sitting across the table from each other, because if you're looking at Mrs. Jones, you can't see Mr. Jones behind you, you know, waving his arms going, no, don't say yes. And eventually you get to the point where you say, so would you like to invest in life insurance tonight? And almost inevitably they would say, well, we have to think it over. Either we have to think it over, or I can't tell you how many times I heard this one. You know, on our wedding night, we made an agreement that we would never make a large purchase without thinking it over and sleeping on it. So we've already decided we're going to buy from you, Jeff, but we have this rule where, you know, we've got to think it over just overnight. So, you know, give us a call tomorrow. We'll buy. You know, and of course they never answer the phone again. So, with the Ben Franklin close, what you would do is say this: well, I can appreciate that you want to think it over. In fact, that makes brings to mind Benjamin Franklin, who was inarguably one of the most brilliant men in American history. Of course, you've heard of Mr. Benjamin Franklin, haven't you, Jeff? And of course, the customer goes, yes, of course I have. Well, what old Ben would do, you know, suddenly now he's old Ben, your best friend, when he had a decision to make like this, is he'd take out a legal pad, and at that point you take out a legal pad, you draw a line down the center, and you actually say, and he would draw a line down the center, and on the left side of the page he would write the word yay, Y-E-A, and on the right side of the page he'd write the word nay, N-A-Y. And then what old Ben would do is he'd go ahead and he'd list all the reasons to go ahead with his investment or his purchase on the left side, and all the reasons to not go ahead with the purchase on the right side, and then Ben would simply add up all the left side and all the right side, and whichever side had more, that's the way he would make his decision. So why don't we give it a try right now? So why do you and Mrs. Jehoshaphat think that you should go ahead and invest in life insurance tonight? And of course the customer would come up with 2 or 3 or maybe 4 reasons why they should buy life insurance tonight. And then I, as the salesperson, would have 75 more reasons why they should go ahead and invest in life insurance tonight. And then, of course, you continue on by saying, and then, of course, you know, let's be fair, Ben would put down all the reasons that he didn't want to move forward with the sale, with the purchase. So why do you think you should not go ahead and invest in life insurance tonight? And, of course, the customer's not a fool. They know they gave me 4 reasons to move forward with it. So they'll give me 5 or 6 or maybe 7 reasons why they should not move forward with it. Of course, I had no reasons why they should not move forward with buying life insurance tonight. And then when you're done with that, you simply say, well, let's add it all up. Let's see, 79 to 6. You know what old Ben would do, and you would say that as you would, excuse me, extend your hand out with your pen pointing towards them and say, you know what old Ben would do, with a big smile on your face. That's the Ben Franklin close. I don't think it worked when Ben was alive. It never worked once when I tried it, because people don't make decisions that way. Even though they may in their head, people make decisions emotionally and then back it up with logic. So we're looking to get them to make an emotional decision, but the whole point of this is that, you know, you can know 187 ways to close the sale, and I don't think you need to. I think you only need to know one way to close the sale. But if you don't know why people are buying, then you do need to be a strong closer. If you didn't ask the right questions and discover why they'll buy from you, you do need to be a strong closer. Now, here's the thing. This 4-step process that I've been talking about works. Now, how do I know it works? Because it's what almost every salesperson does. Hi, how about those Mets? Couple of quick questions. Present, 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 close, 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 close. And occasionally, even the typical salesperson makes sales. I'm going to suggest that in order to be more successful, what we want to do is use a different process. And I call it the conversational sales process, or conversational selling skills. And that's what we're going to focus on for certainly today's session and probably part of the next one. So you'll notice that in the conversational sales process, we still have the same 4 steps. The first one, opening and rapport building. I'm going to share with you a little bit of idea on how I think a better way to do that is. Information gathering is step number 2. We're going to insert a 3rd step called confirmation. We're still presenting, which was the 3rd step in the last one. We're going to insert negotiating if needed, because sometimes that is necessary, and I think that's part of the sales process sometimes. And of course, we're still going to close, but I'm going to share with you what I consider a very honest, straightforward, and easy way to close without having to use tricks. I'm not looking to trick anybody into anything, and here's my personal belief, Jeff. You, me, Tommy Hopkins, I don't care who you want to name, none of us are good enough to talk anybody into anything that they don't want, don't need, or can't afford, unless we're willing to lie, cheat, or steal. So if that's the case, if we're not willing to lie, cheat, or steal, which I'm not, and I'm going to assume you're not either, then we can be very straightforward in our selling, and that's my preference, and I believe that's the customer's preference too. I believe prospects, in order to turn them into customers, really want their salespeople to be friendly and have some rapport with them, be trustworthy, and get straight to the point. I call it Jeff Goldberg's School of Direct Selling, not direct selling like face-to-face selling, which is what we do, but being direct, just telling the truth and coming straight out and doing it. So in this process, we start with opening.
If you don't mind, I'm sorry, would you mind just going back to that for 1 second?
Which part?
The previous screen.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, because you know me, I'm doing this writing as I move along. Well, I'm going to see it as we continue, correct?
Take your time, yeah. We're going to go through each step.
Okay, cool.
And of course, I'll be posting this for you, you know, when we're done, either later sometime today or tomorrow, early tomorrow, so you'll be able to go refer to it. I can also, I can send you these PowerPoints anytime you want.
Yeah, I would like that, but again, I give you my word, I'm not. This won't be distributed to anybody. I want you to understand that. I mean, just so you know, I speak very highly of you internally. Your name has come up. Your name is. I'm not kidding. Your name has come up probably about 100 times over the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 weeks when I'm going to each of these sales offices. As a matter of fact, a couple of people know you, which is incredible, and I'm talking about in the Philly region as well. And they talk about McClive, and I laugh, and every single time they mention this, they mention you. Who was the guy? The guy was great.
Huh.
And I said, funny you should say that. Here's what I'm doing with the guy.
Huh, that's so funny. Yeah, we got down to Philly on a couple of occasions. I know that there was one that was supposed to happen that got canceled. But, yeah, we were down there once or twice.
Yeah.
Look, I got nothing to say against Susan. You know, God bless her. I hope she's making a million gazillion dollars and is very successful.
No, but it's not, you know, I hear you, Jeff, and I get you, but my point is that I think that, and I think you know this already, that the majority of these people were pretty much taken aback by what you had to offer. They thought that was a much, and what I've heard, it's a much easier way. It's a much way you can relate, and quite frankly, it's an effective way. And again, I mentioned you directly when I talk about voicemails. And it's so funny because somebody else came back to me with the one that you did word for word. This guy told me that, you know, we should call up. He suggested, hey, I'm calling about your bill. And I cracked up laughing. I said, you know, I have to tell you a funny story. How does that work? Well, sometimes they get mad. Yeah, but you calm them down. It's a really effective way, and I loved it. And they started laughing. I said, it's kind of similar. Let's go over what we're going to do today. They crack up laughing. So you're remembered, my friend. You're remembered.
Oh, that's great, man. Thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate you letting me know that. Yeah, I'm calling about your account. I'm calling about your bill. All that stuff works great. So
exactly.
You got enough of the screen for now?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm all set.
Hey, no sweat. Okay. So in conversational selling skills, I still believe we do have to open up a sale somehow and do a little rapport building. And the way I like to build rapport, rather than with, stupid stuff like how about those Mets, or I mean, I don't know about you, but I know I've been guilty of this in the past. You walk into somebody's office, you see a picture of the family sitting on their desk, and the first thing you say is cute kids, even though they look like gorillas, or the wife is hideous. She looks like Quasimodo, and you're like, wow, what a gorgeous family you've got. It's cheap. Everybody knows what you're doing. The prospect knows what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Neither of you like it. It doesn't do anything to establish rapport. In fact, I was at this point in a seminar once at a large health insurance, actually Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I was talking about, it really cheapens you when you come up with stupid stuff like, how about those Mets, and you golf, I golf. And a guy raised his hand. He goes, you're not going to believe this. Now, these guys don't sell directly to the end user. They go to brokers who they want to sell Blue Cross Blue Shield to their clients. So it's not the same as a direct sale like you and I do. What they're trying to do is get brokers to recommend Blue Cross Blue Shield more often than not. So these brokers are pretty jaded. They get attacked by a zillion different insurance companies constantly. And a guy raised his hand and goes, you're not going to believe this. I went on a meeting at a broker's office, and he had a huge fish mounted on a plaque behind his desk on the wall. And I thought it would be stupid for me to do anything but mention the fish. And I said, wow, that's some fish. You've got to be some fisherman. Hey, where'd you catch that? And he said, the broker looked at me with a look of disgust in his eye, and he said, you, just like every other salesperson comments on that fish, I'm not a fisherman at all. I keep it up there just to see if guys like you are going to comment on it. Dope.
Wow.
Now, what do you got? Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if when we were together, I shared the John Madden story. Did I share that?
No.
The John Madden story goes like this. You know who John Madden is, right?
No, of course.
Famous footballer.
Please, the video game guru, by the way. He changed a few things in my household. As a Jet fan, because I play John Madden and they default against the Dolphins when I go to practice against my friends, my 3-year-old son at the time, he was 3, became a Dolphin fan and has not stopped becoming a Dolphin fan since then. So thanks, John Madden.
Well, here's the John Madden story. I don't know whether it's true or it's an urban legend, but everybody knows that John Madden doesn't like to fly. He won't fly.
Right.
And most people know he doesn't like to have his picture taken because he's a big, hulking, ugly guy. So the John Madden story goes like this. A salesperson goes into Big Co. to sell Mr. Big, the CEO of the company, whatever he's got to sell him. And the administrative assistant ushers the salesperson into Mr. Big's office and says, please have a seat. Mr. Big will be joining you in a moment. Make yourself comfortable. She walks out, and immediately the guy starts looking around the room to figure out what he can talk about to establish a little rapport. He's looking at the pictures on the wall, nothing there. He's looking around for, golf clubs or anything like that, anything he can comment on, can't find a thing. And then he notices on the credenza behind Mr. Big's desk, there's a picture in a frame, an 8x10 framed photograph of Mr. Big with his arm around what looks like John Madden. And he goes, Eureka. Everybody knows John Madden doesn't like to have his picture taken. Everybody knows he doesn't like to travel. When this guy walks in, I'm going to say, hey, how in the world did you get your picture taken with John Madden? Because everybody knows he doesn't want to get his picture taken, and that's going to be instant rapport. Fast forward a minute or two, Mr. Big comes in, sits down, says, so how can I help you? The salesperson says, before we get started, I got to ask you a question. Everybody knows that John Madden hates 2 things. One is flying, the other one is having his picture taken. But I see on your credenza, in a frame, you've got your picture taken with your arm around none other than John Madden. How in the world did you get John Madden to pose for a picture with you? To which, Mr. You already know the punchline. I can hear it in your laughter.
No, I'm figuring it out, but go on.
He says, that's not John Madden, that's my wife. At which point the salesperson supposedly gets up and says, okay, thank you very much. Obviously, I won't be selling you anything today, and he walks out the door. Urban legend, true story, I don't know, but the point to me is you don't want to be making stupid comments in order to establish rapport. So I said, I know, I love telling that story. It's great, right? You can just imagine it actually happening, right? I once went into an office. This one's absolutely true. I walk into a guy's office, and it's covered. I mean, every inch of every wall space is covered with pictures of famous golf courses from around the world. Beautiful, famous golf courses. I mean, everything. There's the putter in the corner, you know, and he's got the little machine that you shoot, you take shots, and it shoots it back at you. And I don't golf, but I said, wow, I don't golf, but you must be one hell of a golfer. And he looks at me and goes, no, we're not in my office. This is somebody else's. So yeah, right. It was just insane. So to me,
wow.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So to me, the way to truly begin to establish rapport is to have a conversation. And the conversation I want to have gets you, the prospect, talking as much as possible, as early as possible. And the way I do that is by asking you to have a conversation with me about your favorite subject. And I'm guessing you know what everybody's favorite subject is, yes?
Themselves.
Yes, exactly right. Everybody's favorite subject is me. So what I want to do is I want to get the prospect talking about themselves. And the way I do that is with one very simple question. The words I use are these. Hey, Jeff, I'm just curious before we get started. How'd you get to be, and then I fill in the blank with their title. How'd you get to be the CEO of the company? How'd you get to be the vice president of sales here at Verizon Wireless? How'd you get to be, fill in the blank with whoever, how'd you get to be the procurement officer here at XYZ Corporation? How'd you get to be the human resources? Whatever it is, typically you walk in, you shake hands, yes, you're sitting down, and as I'm sitting down, I'm saying those words. Hey, Jeff, I'm curious before we get started. Now, I'm saying it that way on purpose. The I'm just curious before we get started, well, the I'm just curious is what I call a softener. Softener.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, out of curiosity is another one I use, by the way is another one I use. A softener is a phrase that you use before a question which softens the question, because otherwise, if the whole name of the game is asking questions, which it is, the key to selling is asking questions, my friend, I can promise you that. So if the name of the game is asking questions, if I ask too many questions, it's going to sound like an interrogation. And I don't want it to sound like an interrogation because I don't want you to feel like you're being interrogated. But I do need to ask you a lot of questions. So how do I keep it conversational? And the way I keep it conversational is by using softeners. I'm just curious. How'd you get to be this? By the way, why do you do that? Out of curiosity. I use those three constantly. And you have to say them like you really are curious, like it really is just something that occurred. Oh, by the way, you have to kind of be an actor. In fact, I think most salespeople are just frustrated actors anyways, frustrated actors and comedians. So what you want to do is use softeners liberally in your questioning phase. So I'm going to start out with, I'm just curious, and I also say, before we get started. Hey, Jeff, I'm just curious before we get started. The before we get started kind of is like we're off the record. The sales call hasn't really started yet, Jeff. So you and I can talk like guys or like human beings if you're speaking to a woman. I'm just curious, before we get started, how'd you get to be blah, blah, blah? So what's your exact title?
How did you get to be CEO, in other words, is what you're saying? I don't know if that's...
Yeah.
Like, here's my problem. I mean, it has to come on. I love it, by the way. Absolutely love it. It's not even a question. I'm going to be using this. But I have to be careful with the way I go to that next question. I don't want it to seem like, hey, how did you get to be the CEO? You know what I'm saying? I have to come up with, I've got to get it done in a proper fashion, I think. I got to work on that a little bit, but I love it.
Well, you just gave the perfect example, Jeff. And that's the example, the point that people often make when they're talking about the English language, that, the way somebody understands your question or your statement depends on where you put the emphasis, what word you put the emphasis on. So how'd you get to be the CEO? It sounds like you're such an idiot. How could you possibly be the CEO of this company? Whereas
right.
If you don't emphasize the you, how'd you get to be hey, I'm just curious, Jeff, how'd you get to be the CEO here at XYZ company?
Nice.
See the difference?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So here's what I
Jeff,
find.
I love it.
Yeah, thanks, man. Me
I
too.
love it. I absolutely
And not only do we both love it, but it works beautifully. Because even people who don't like to talk about themselves like to talk about themselves. They say they don't like to talk about themselves, but they like to talk about themselves, especially if you're selling high. You know, if you're selling at a higher level, you know, like I sell to people typically who have a title president or CEO or the global god of sales. I forgot the woman's name. There was a woman who was in charge of all of the Northeast when Susan and I worked with your company. I loved this woman. Do you know who I'm talking about? I forgot what her Pat somebody maybe?
Iarato? Pat Iarato? No.
That might be
Melanie?
No, Melanie I think was in charge of training. But
Melanie, Pat Iarato was in New England. She was running New England at the time.
That's exactly who I'm talking about. That's exactly who I mean.
Yeah.
Large. She was terrific, man.
Yeah, large. She has short hair. She's now moved on to. She's running something in what we call VEZ. They're merging some of the things between Verizon Business and Verizon Wireless at this point. So let me tell you something. I got to get on with Jamal again because I think there's a great opportunity for you there because you have groups of people that can't sell. They're engineers on that side of the fence, and they just don't know what they're doing. It's a joke. I went in with these guys in front of Apple. We had a meeting in Cupertino about 2 months ago, and we did some type of a presentation, if you will, about trying to map in a specific network, you know, the iOS environment in their house. And they came up with everything, and they could not present. I was the only sales guy there, and you better believe I won the whole thing. They gave me a trophy, which was a stupid water cooler, but it was like taking candy from a baby, Jeff.
Wow. So these are sales engineers?
Yeah, that can't sell.
Yeah, I actually put together a program just for sales engineers when I was doing work with Cablevision, because they're engineers, they're not salespeople, but they need to understand the sales process and how to sell, and on top of that, they also have to understand how to work in concert with a salesperson. I call it the dance. Right. You know, how do you dance? How do you dance together with the salesperson? Because it's crucial that the salesperson maintains that they're the person who's in charge of the sale. The sales engineer is there to support that. And often they have no personality because they're engineering types. Often they have not the first clue about how to sell, and they rarely understand that you need to shut up most of the time. Right. You're there for when I say, hey, what do you think of that, Jeff? And, you know, how would you answer that question? Because I need your expertise. But then I need you to shut up. So, yeah, that's absolutely an area where a lot of companies are having a very hard time. Yeah. At any rate, what I find is the best thing to do is to walk in, ask about them, and then do the toughest thing that salespeople can possibly do, which is shut up. So I'm going to walk into your office. I'm going to ask you, hey, Jeff, I'm just curious, before we get started, how'd you get to be the, whatever your actual title is, and then I'm going to shut up. Now, before we go on to shutting up, there's one other thing that I think is important here. At this point in the sales process, we've just walked into somebody's office, we've shaken their hands, and we're sitting down and we're saying those words, I'm just curious before we get started, how'd you get to be the blah, blah, blah. At that point, there should be nothing out of your bag. There should be, I don't want, you know, you probably have all kinds of great visuals. Maybe you bring a laptop with you, give a presentation with PowerPoint or something, or video, who knows. There could be a million things you want to take out of your briefcase. Don't take any of them out at this point. The only thing I think that you should have out at this point are a pen and a legal pad. Now, here's why. Let's say you've got lots of sales materials that you've brought with you, some kind of presentation or whatever it is. If I take them all out of my briefcase and put them on your desk, and just put them off to the side because I'm going to get to them, while you're talking to me, even if I'm asking you about yourself, while you're talking to me, you're focused on the pile. What's in the pile? When's he going to show me that stuff? Why is he putting it on my desk? Why, you know, there's all kinds of questions going on, and I don't want you focused on what's in the pile. What I want you to focus on is your conversation with me about your favorite subject, yourself. So you shouldn't take anything out of your bag at that point except a pen and a legal pad. And the reason I want you to have the pen and the legal pad out is because when you ask about them and they start answering you, I want people to take occasional notes. I want you to write down occasionally. They'll say, normally what I get is somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes of people talking about their past, where they went to school, what their first job was, how they got promoted, how they got recruited away, whatever it was. They typically, what they do is they give me their resume. Not that they hand me their written resume, but they tell me, here's what I did and here's how I got to here. And all I'm doing during that time is taking an occasional note, because when I take a note, what I'm saying to you is, what you're telling me is important. What you are telling me has value.
Right.
I'm interested in you, and that's exactly what I want people to be thinking, that I'm interested in them. The other thing, of course, that taking notes does is it helps me remember stuff later on, because no matter how casual you are, how comfortable you are during a sales call, it's still a somewhat tense situation. When you meet Apple in Cupertino, you know, the nerves are on. I'm guessing this was a huge opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so, it would have been. I mean, it would have been, definitely.
Yeah,
but I mean, the way I was looking at it, Jeff, honestly, I wanted to work for Apple. So I was sitting there talking to the salespeople I knew and that were in that room, and I wowed them. So I mean, that was important. I'd love to work for that company. I would kill to. But anyway, that's me. So.
Who wouldn't? I mean, come on, they have the coolest toys in the world. They just do. I love Apple products. Anyways, yeah, you go in, you start this conversation, you're taking down an occasional note, and the other thing you're doing is you're looking them in the eye. Jeff, I can't tell you when I observe salespeople how often, because one of the things I look at is their body language, not just the prospect's body language, but I'm also looking at the body language of the salesperson. And very little says more about you than if you won't look people in the eye. If you'd like to be trusted, and of course the whole goal of this establishing rapport part is gaining some information, starting the ball rolling of rapport building, gaining that initial trust so that we can build on that and develop the relationship, very little screws that up more than if you won't look somebody in the eye. So I want you to have a notepad out and a pen and look people in the eye and just shut up. I used to have to bite the inside of my cheeks because I'm a guy who loves to talk. Clearly, that's why I do this job. I used to, no kidding, I used to bite the inside of my cheeks to stop myself from jumping in, stop myself from opening my big mouth when the other person is talking. So all you want to do is be listening, nodding your head occasionally, saying encouraging things like, really, what made you do that? Wow, that's interesting. How'd you make that decision? Stuff like that. And because you want to encourage them to talk as long as they possibly can. Personally, I don't care if I take up the entire sales call with them just talking about themselves. Now, that doesn't happen very often. It's happened once or twice in my career. But I do want to encourage them to talk as long as possible so that they believe I'm interested in them and that they're giving me information that may be helpful in learning more about them and establishing rapport. Does that make sense?
Right. It makes a lot of sense.
Perfect.
And I like the whole shut up thing. I mean, I know the old rule is he who talks first loses. I don't want to get down to closing. Just keep your mouth shut.
Well, that's typically in a negotiation or in closing, yes. Yeah. He or she who speaks first loses. But really, look, salespeople tend to want to vomit. We just want to talk and talk and talk and talk because we think if we do enough talking, we'll convince somebody to buy something, except that's just not the way it works. See, most people think that sales is about convincing, persuading, and talking people into things. Convincing, persuading, and talking people into things, but it's not. Selling is a conversation or a series of conversations that lead someone to choose to do business with you. So as opposed to me convincing you that you need to buy something or talking you into buying something, it's not the way it really works. The way it really works in the real world when it's done by the best, and by the way, when it's done by the best, nobody realizes that they're being sold or even selling. If you came out with me on sales calls, what I would hope that you would comment later on is, wow, I didn't even see you selling them. You kind of just had a chat. It looked like you were just talking. In fact, the greatest example of this for me was, geez, it's got to be 12 years ago now, when I was working for Schiffman. The guy underneath him, his name is Steve Bookbinder. At least it was. He left before the company before I did. When I joined the company, Steve Bookbinder was the lead trainer. He was the president of the company under Steve Schiffman. He was the lead trainer, and just, I mean, he's the smartest human being I personally know. I consider myself a pretty smart guy. He's the smartest human being I personally know. We've written 2 books together. He's become a good friend. But the point is, shortly after I joined the company, went through 2 weeks of training, the executive vice president of national accounts calls me into her office one day and says, hey, I've got this lead that's been sitting in my desk for like 6 months. It's I think it's a small company out on Long Island, and you should probably give them a call. They called in here like 6 months ago, but nobody wanted to get on a train and go out and see them. I think they've got 5 or 6 salespeople. Why don't you take the lead, see if you can revive it? Now, a 6-month-old lead didn't sound very exciting to me, but I had nothing else to do because I had just been through training and I had to get my thing started. So it's either pick up the phone and cold call or go knocking on doors, or I'll take this lead. So I took the lead. I call up the company. I make an appointment. I get out there. They're out in Melville, right off the Long Island Expressway. I pull into their parking lot, and as I'm parking and I'm looking at the building, I say to myself, because, by the way, the building's immense. I mean, it's huge. I'm saying to myself, if this company only has 5 or 6 salespeople, I will eat my hat. No kidding. I will go buy a hat and I will eat it. There's no way this company only has 5 or 6 salespeople. So I sit down with the what was his title? I don't know, the VP of Training and Development or something like that, which again is an indicator that there's not just 5 or 6 people. And I asked him about himself, get a little rapport going, and then I asked him the most important question at that point, which was, hey, I'm just curious, how many salespeople do you have? Guy looks up at the ceiling, puts his hand on his chin like he's being thoughtful, goes, how many salespeople do we have? That's a good question. Well, let's see. We've got 250 inside salespeople. And I said, did you say 250? He goes, yeah, 250 inside salespeople. And I said, there's more? He goes, oh, yeah. By the time he was done, Jeff, they had 860 salespeople. 860 salespeople nationwide. Boy, oh, boy, was I an excited camper. Because to me, the more salespeople, the better the deal is, because I charge by the day, not by the person. And a company that has a lot of salespeople, when I give them my daily rate, they go, we'll stick 15, 20 people in a room. It's like nothing. It's a no-brainer. We can get our people trained for $200-300 a day. Like that. Whereas when I go into a company which has 2 salespeople, they take my daily rate and divide it by 2 and go, whoa, that's pretty pricey per person. Anyways, this guy's got 860 salespeople. I leave the first meeting. I'm immediately on my cell phone calling this guy, Steve Bookbinder. And I said, Steve, I just left this company. Lynn gave me the lead. She thought they had 5 or 6 salespeople. They've got 860. I've got an appointment to come back next week. Is there any chance I could get you to come with me on the appointment? And Steve said, who's a very funny guy, said, chance? You couldn't stop me from coming on the appointment with you. So the point of this whole story is next week he comes out on the sales call with me. I introduce Steve to the VP of Training and Development, and then I sat back for 45 minutes. Now, in an hour and a half the previous week of me just talking to the guy personally, I filled up a page with notes. I had lots and lots of great notes. In 45 minutes of listening to Steve chat with this guy, I filled up 4 pages of notes. 4 pages, and to me the most important part, the most amazing part was, it never really seemed like he was interrogating him. It never really seemed like he was like they were having a sales conversation at all. It just seemed like a couple of guys sitting in a room having an interesting chat. And it went kind of back and forth. And when we got outside and got into my car, I said, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I've been in sales at that point. I've been in sales for 29 years. And I've never seen anything like that. He goes, well, first you should know I was showing off for you. And second, that's what it's about. It's just about having a conversation. And that's what you want to do. So you want to get them talking about themselves, which opens them up a little bit. And then what you want to do is you want to move on to the information gathering phase, where you really gather lots and lots of information. And the way you do that is by keeping it as possible. And the way you soften it, the way you make it more conversational, is by using those softeners I was telling you about. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, good. At some point, whoops, that wasn't what I wanted to do. At some point, you're going to finish up that rapport-building conversation. So you're going to say, and that's how I became blah, blah, blah. Or, you'll see that conversation is winding down. And at that point, what we want to do is we want to move the sale forward to the second step. We want to transition from where we are, which is opening up and rapport building, and we want to transform into the information gathering phase. But the question becomes, how do we make that transformation? How do we move from the transition? How do we make the move from the first phase to the second phase? And I find that the best way is when they're winding down their talk about who they are and what they do, you can say, would it help if I tell you about us? Or would it help if I tell you a little bit about Verizon Wireless? Would it help if I go first? Anything like that, because what we want to do is, what we want is the right to ask questions. Now, is it implied when somebody agrees to an appointment with you that you have the right to ask questions? Yeah, pretty much. They know that you're going to ask them questions, but what they really expect is that you're going to come in and give them a presentation. So we have to actually devise a way to have the right, that they'll be comfortable with us asking questions. And the way I believe is the best way to do that is first to say something like, would it help if I go first? Would it help if I tell you a little bit about us? Would it help if I explain a little bit about our company? And of course, what are they going to say? If I make an appointment with you to come in and sell my services and I say, hey, Jeff, would it help if I tell you a little bit about Jeff Goldberg and Associates? What are you going to say?
Of course it will.
Of course, because you made an appointment with me to have a sales conversation. So of course you're going to go, duh, of course, yeah, go ahead, tell me about your company. That's why you're here in the first place. So right. At that point, what you want to do is you want to give them your brief commercial. Now, I'm assuming that makes sense to you. Brief commercial, elevator Absolutely. Pitch, 30-second commercial. Good. So at that point, you want to give them your 30-second commercial, and here's why I want you to do that. Now, remember, when I say your 30-second commercial, I'm not talking about this is your presentation. I'm talking about this is just your 30-second commercial. Here's who I am. Here's what company I'm with. Here's what we do. And we'll talk more about how to devise a 30-second commercial later on, the elements that it takes to put together a good one. But at this point, you give them your 30-second commercial. And the reason that we want to give them the 30-second commercial is I believe that if you ask me a question and I answer your question, I now have the right to ask questions too, right? Because if you can ask me questions, I can ask you questions too. Do you agree?
Agreed.
Good. So what I want is to force you to ask me, I can answer it, thereby gaining the right to ask questions of my own. And the way I'm going to do that is by saying, would it help if I go first? Would it help if I tell you a little bit about us? Would it help if I tell you a little bit about Jeff Goldberg and Associates? Because, in essence, when you say, yes, tell me about your company, in essence, you've asked me about my company. Now, you haven't come right out and say, hey, could you tell me a little bit about your company? But when I kind of force you to do that by saying, would it help if I tell you a little bit about us? And I go, and you say yes, in essence, you've asked me about my company. And when I give you my brief commercial, I've now answered your question, the question that you didn't actually come right out and ask. Is this making sense?
Right.
Good.
That makes perfect sense.
Good. So you didn't actually say the words, but in essence, you've asked me a question, tell me about your company, tell me about yourself, and now I answer it with my brief commercial. So I have now answered your question, and in my mind, I now have the right to ask questions too. And that's all I want to do, Jeff. Because sales is not about the presentation, and sales is not about the close. Almost anybody who you ask, if you survey, even in just your company, go do an informal survey, ask 100 of the reps and managers, what are the qualities of the best salespeople? I would bet you that most of them will say, well, the best salespeople are the best presenters, and the best salespeople are the best closers. Best presenters and strongest closers. However, in my professional experience, the best salespeople are sometimes great presenters, sometimes not, sometimes great closers, sometimes not, but they're always three things. The best salespeople are always three things. One, they're the best question askers. Great salespeople are great question askers or interviewers. They're wonderful at asking questions. They're naturally curious, or they seem like they're naturally curious, and they're always asking lots and lots of questions. The second thing that great salespeople are is if you're going to ask great questions, you have to be a great listener. And most salespeople stink at listening. But great salespeople are very, very good listeners.
They sure do.
Yeah. They ask great questions, and they listen carefully to the answers. In fact, my ex-wife used to marvel at what she called my listening look. Now, that's nothing I do on purpose. I wish I was conscious of it. It's just the way I'm wired up. I look at people like I actually care what they're saying. And I think it's just because it's the way I'm wired up. I'm a naturally curious person. I love to know what makes things tick. I love to know how people got to be who they are. I love to find stuff out. I love watching shows on TV like How Things Are Made. You ever see that?
Mm-hmm.
You've seen that show? I love it. I mean, how does a crayon get made? How does a tennis racket get made? I love that. I'm naturally curious. So I have a look that I give people when I'm listening to them. So a great salesperson has to have that listening skill. And we're going to talk more. So you have to be a great salespeople are great question askers. Great salespeople are the best listeners. And the third characteristic of great salespeople are they're great storytellers. A great salesperson is a great storyteller. Think about any salesperson that you know and respect. I promise you, if you think about it, they've told you great stories, not just about selling. They can tell you a story about anything. Great salespeople are those three things. Sometimes they're great presenters, sometimes they're great closers, but they're always great question askers, great listeners, and great storytellers. And the story, by the way, that salespeople have to tell is a story, what I call a verbal proof story. And that's a story about somebody else like you who, by doing business with us, live happily ever after. And we'll talk more about that later on in the process and why those are important and how you put them together. All right, so we're going to gain the right to ask questions by asking, would it help if I go first? Would it help if I tell you a little bit about our company? We're going to give our brief commercial, our elevator pitch, and then the way to transition into the information gathering is simply to end your brief commercial with your first question and a softener. So at the end of my brief commercial, you're going to hear something like this. Well, sorry, I see it's my kid calling me. I'll call him later.
No, hey, yeah, if you need to listen to me, if you need to take that, I'm here. It's okay.
No. He's home from camp today. I'll call him later. No sweat, pal. Thanks.
Are you sure?
Yeah, positive.
Okay, no problem.
He wanted to FaceTime me, so I know it can't be an emergency.
Thanks,
okay. I appreciate the daddy and you understanding the daddy and me.
No problem.
So I'm going to end my brief commercial like this. By the way, even though we're not the least expensive option, people choose Jeff Goldberg and Associates because when we're done with them, their salespeople do get more appointments with decision makers. They do have a shorter sales cycle, and they just plain close more business more profitably. By the way, I'm just curious, and you go right into your first question. So you end your brief commercial by transitioning using a softener and asking your first question. Now, I recommend that when you get to your questioning phase that you should have a standard first question that you ask every single time.
Just, I'm sorry, map that part out for me. Map that part out for me one more time. We're moving over to. We're transitioning out of the elevator pitch. You're saying at that point you want to end it with you want to transition it into, let's say, a statement reiterating what you are, what the results have been, and then go into the first question.
Yes, we're going to go right from the brief commercial, and we're going to talk later on about how to put together a brief commercial. But you go right from the brief commercial into asking your first question because it's the second phase of the 6-step process, information gathering. And you can't. Here's what I don't want to hear. Would it be okay if I asked you a few questions? Or I need to gather some information. Would it be okay if I took some notes? Never, ever ask. You don't need permission to ask questions. You don't need permission to take notes. And I understand the psychology behind doing that, but I disagree with it. I think the psychology in a true sales situation needs to be, I'm a professional, you're a professional. Absolutely. You're an executive, I'm an executive. What I don't want is to elevate the prospect. Do they sometimes have a higher title than me? Well, I'm the CEO of my company. Now, if I sit down with the CEO of Verizon, do they have a more powerful title? Well, we're both CEOs, but there's certainly a difference between running a one-man organization and running a multinational corporation. I understand that, but I consider myself an equal of every prospect I walk into. And I've spoken with some pretty high-level people. So you want to maintain that you're on the same level, and I think that when you ask permission to take notes or ask permission to ask questions, what you're doing is you're subjugating yourself. And here's the thing I don't want to do. I don't want to ask any questions that I don't know the answers to. It's kind of like being a lawyer in a courtroom. Lawyers, I have a bunch of friends who are lawyers, and every one of them has said the same thing. You never ask a question in a courtroom that you don't know the answer to already, because you could get blindsided and it could blow the whole case for you. So what you want to do is, I don't want to ask a question that I don't know the answer to, because if I say, hey, would it be okay if I take some notes? What if they say no? Now, nobody's going to do that, but what if they do? Would it be okay if I ask you a few questions? No, just get right to your presentation. Well, I need to ask you some questions. No, just get right to your presentation. Well, stupid me for asking permission. So we're going to transition from that brief commercial into the information gathering phase by simply using a softener and asking your first question. Good so far? Before we move on to the questioning phase, though, we have... Oh, good, good. So before we move on, then I want to talk a little bit about putting together the brief commercial, because it is crucial. In order to put together a good brief commercial, you need to answer a few questions, and some of them are on the screen right now. So first, of course, is what is it that we're selling? And usually, salespeople are not really very good at expressing what they're selling. I'm going to skip ahead to something that I know is in here later, but I think it's an important conversation right now. I'm guessing, and I'm not going to say this to be insulting in the least, Jeff, but I've dealt with highly tenured salespeople like you with lots of experience, smart guys who know what they're talking about, but very rarely do I find that somebody really understands the concept of features and benefits. So again, I don't say this to insult you, but can you define to me the difference between features and benefits? And I'm not talking about the features and benefits of a variety. What? Say it again,
Jeff, I'm so offended that I need Prozac to continue. I said I'm so Zach. You really
too funny. I appreciate that, man.
Please, how could you hurt me like that?
Look, I was once in a room with like 200 people, and I said, who can tell me the difference between features and benefits? And one guy stood up and said, really? You're going to insult our intelligence with that? I said, no, I'm not insulting your intelligence, but tell me the difference. And of course he couldn't. So I'd be happy to listen to you.
My idea
how
of
do
the
you
feature
define
and benefit is, look, the feature, well, the feature is what, let's say, the solution or product that you're selling. It's one of the options that it has. The benefit is how it impacts the organization.
Yeah,
in other words, for who you're selling to, I believe a benefit is, look, how is it going to impact your organization positively? That's the way I look at it.
Good. So I think that's pretty darn close, and I don't think the definition that I'm going to share with you is very much different at all, but I like to boil it down to its most basic part. So to me, a feature is what something is or something has. A feature is what something is or something has. Excuse me. Hey, be quiet, you. I'm a big, tough guy. I just scared my dog. So a feature is what something is or something has.
What's the name of your dog?
Oh, my dog is Bella, B-E-L-L-A. She's a pug. I've had her since January. I had a pug that passed away last August. She was almost 15 years old, and this one's feisty like you wouldn't believe. So, yeah, she's just crazy.
I'm not a dog guy. I was forced to get. I'm not a dog guy. I was forced to get one in my marriage, obviously, and I wound up liking them very, very much. I named them after all the. I had two. I named them after the thugs from The Godfather, Clemenza and Luca.
Oh, that's too funny! Greatest movie of all time, of course.
Oh my God, of course.
So.
All right. So features are what something is or has, and then the benefit is
what it does. So features are what something is or has, benefits are what something does. So here's the example I always love to use. I'm assuming you have some type of a vehicle, right? Car, truck, something like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what do you have, a car?
I have a Hyundai that's worth about $75.
Perfect, okay. Spoken like a true divorced guy. So I'm guessing when you bought your Hyundai, that
yes.
It came with it came with tires, yes?
Yes, it did.
Good, got it. And I'm guessing that you did not buy the car because it had tires.
I thought
Would that be right, Jeff? You did not buy the car because it had tires. You would not have bought the cars, but you didn't buy the car because it had tires. Tires are a feature of a car, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I think I'm going to switch over to the phone line. I'm losing you on here.
Yeah, I think there's a delay going on.
I'm getting a little bit of a delay. I'm going to call you from. Yeah, I'm going to call you back from the phone number rather than from the computer, if that's okay.
Do you need the number? Do you have it?
Okay.
Okay, I'll wait for you.
Hi, Jeff. Sorry.
Hey, perfect. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Yeah, there seemed to be some kind of a delay in there before, so this is great. So what I was saying was that your car came with tires, but you didn't buy the car because it has tires. You would not have bought the car if it didn't have tires, but you didn't buy it because it has tires. Tires are a feature of a car, yes?
Yes.
Good. And your car also came with a steering wheel, right?
Yes, it did.
And we could use the same example. You didn't buy the car because it had a steering wheel. You would not have bought a car without a steering wheel, but you did not buy a car with a steering wheel. A steering wheel is also a feature of a car. Now watch this. Why did you buy a car? Not why did you buy a Hyundai. Why did you buy a car?
To get from point A to point B.
Right, that's exactly it. That's the benefit of owning, leasing, or renting an automobile of some type. It takes you from point A to point B without you having to walk, take a train, take a bus, take a taxi, ride your bicycle, whatever else you could do. It's the benefit of having a car is it takes you from point A to point B. I'll take it one step further. My hunch is that your $75 car has an air conditioning unit in it, yes?
Yes, and it works.
And it works. Beautiful. And why do you want an air conditioning unit that works in your car? It's not that you really want an air conditioning unit. What do you want?
I want to stay cool when I'm driving to point A.
Right. The benefit of having an air conditioning unit is you get to stay cool when it's hot out. In fact, I think I've shared with you, I live in a beach house. I'm a block from the ocean. But even a block from the ocean, it sometimes get pretty, often we get a nice breeze, but I don't have central air here. I have big window units in fact, I'm in my living room right now. I'm staring at my front window. One of them is consumed with this huge air conditioning unit. Do I have an air conditioning unit in my front window because I think it looks good? No. Do I have an air conditioning unit in my front window because I think it's pretty? No. I have an air conditioning unit because, like you in your car, I want to be cool when it's hot out, the benefit of an air conditioning unit. So that's the difference between features and benefits. Now, why did I talk about this at all? Because salespeople typically, in their presentation, focus on the features. People buy benefits. So if we're focusing on the features of what we do, but people want to buy the benefits of what we do, then what we're doing is we're getting further and further away from a sale when we focus on features, when we should be focusing mostly on the benefits. Don't get me wrong. Are features important? Of course they are. But every feature needs to be tied to a benefit. Every time we talk about a feature, we have to finish it up with, and here's what that means to you, and here's how that helps you, and here's what that does for you. And I don't want to ever make the assumption that the prospect is going to make the leap from the feature to the benefit on their own. Because what if they don't? I'd rather take the risk of insulting their intelligence, and it has a send button, which means when you press it, your call will actually go through. Now obviously that's a stupid example, but I want to make sure that we always tie the feature to the benefit, because the benefit is what the customer is going to buy. Now, why are we talking about this now? Because we're talking about a brief commercial, and I find that in most people's brief commercial, they do say what we sell, but they talk about the features instead of the benefits. If you're going to put together a good brief commercial, you need to focus not only on the features, but also on the benefits. We have to figure out what we sell. Why do people do business with us? Why do people want to do business with Verizon Wireless? What makes us different? What makes us better? And I happen to love the even though we're not the least expensive option. People choose us because. In fact, when you have a moment,
I love that.
Yeah, because look, are you always the cheapest?
No.
No. In fact, it's typically not what people really care about. Everybody thinks they care about being the least expensive. Everybody thinks that the customer only cares about price. Most salespeople think it's about price. Most customers think it's about price, except it almost never is. And the proof is, are you the cheapest? And if you are the cheapest, does that mean you close every deal? Like your company, not your division, your company sends me probably 3 pieces of mail every single day trying to get me to switch from Cablevision to Fios. It's much cheaper. I figured out last night that if I canceled it, and now they're offering it without a contract, I could save about $1,200 in the next year by switching from Cablevision. Except I'm not, because it's not about the price for me. I like the service. I'm very happy. I've been a customer for years. They put a lot of money in my pocket, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's not about the least expensive price. If it was always about the least expensive price, then you and I would be shopping at Sears for our suits. And I'm hoping that you don't shop at Sears for your suits. Because if you do, I just insulted you.
I shoplift from Sears for my suits.
Yeah, it's like, I forgot. Do you live in Westchester?
I do, yeah.
Right. Okay. Do they have Caraco up there, the store Caraco?
I don't think so. No,
okay.
It doesn't sound familiar to me.
It might be just a Long Island thing. It's a men's clothing store. And the thing about Caraco, they're all over Long Island, and they always have this big plate glass window of their store. It's a retail store. And on the plate glass window, it's always in beautiful colors. It says this: 3 shirts, 3 ties, 3 suits, 3 underwear, 3 socks, 3 belts, 3 hankies. In other words, 3 complete outfits other than the shoes, $299. 3 complete outfits for $300. Now, I don't know about you, Jeff. I don't pay $300 for 1 suit, let alone 3 complete outfits, including the socks and the shirts and the ties and all that stuff. So I will never, ever walk into a Caraco. Now, Caraco may very well have the finest men's clothing in the world that would fit me perfectly, except I don't see the value. I don't see the benefit in taking a look at essentially what's about a $50 suit, because the ties have to cost money and the suits and the belts and all that stuff. So it doesn't seem like there's any value there for me. Now, I'll walk into Bloomingdale's and look at suits, but I don't go into Caraco because I don't see the value. Well, people are looking for what's the benefit, what's the value to me, and it's not all about the price. Look, if it was all about the price, everyone in the world would be driving a $75 Hyundai or a 1982 Honda Accord, which you can pick up for about $500.
Right.
And why would they be doing it? Because Hondas last forever. They're comfortable, they're dependable, and as long as you don't care about having, the newest car on the block, you can spend $500 for a used car and get a very dependable car. Except most of us don't. Most of us don't. In fact, in every group of salespeople, I always ask, who's driving a nice car? And salespeople tend to have egos. There's always somebody who raises his hand. Yeah, I'm driving a Mercedes S-Class, or I'm driving, fill in the blank, a Lexus, or something snazzy. And I always ask them how much they paid. And usually the Mercedes guys love to talk about, oh yeah, I paid $80,000 for this car. And my question is always, why didn't a Honda Accord? Because you can buy a used one for $500. Why did you spend $79,500 more than you needed to for an automobile? And by the way, before you answer that question, I want you to know that my $500 Honda Accord will take me into Manhattan the same way your $80,000 Mercedes will. Just as fast, because I don't know about you, but I rarely get to go 140 miles an hour on the Long Island Expressway. So why would you spend $79,500 more than you need to? And they can always give me lots and lots of great reasons. They've got great, it's got a better warranty, it's more comfortable, it's faster, it's this, it's that. There's a million reasons. It impresses the heck out of my neighbors. Whatever their reasons are all valid. And by the way, Jeff, my point is never that you're stupid for spending $80,000 on a car when you don't need to. That's never my point. In fact, I always think, hey, God bless you for having the money, for being able to afford it, and the good taste to spend your money on something like that. My point is that the person that buys an $80,000 Mercedes instead of a $500 Honda Accord used, that person sees $79,500 more value in owning a Mercedes than a $500 Honda Accord. Not that they're right or wrong, it's just that they see the value. They see the benefit. And that's our job. How do we get our customers, our prospective customers, to see the benefit in doing business with us, even though we're not the least expensive option? How do I have a conversation that makes it sound like it's not about the price? It's about what it's going to do for you. And of course, that means that we have to be really good at expressing, here's what we do for you. And I don't know the answers in your industry. Although if you want, we can sit and brainstorm them at some point. But I don't know that your iPhone works any better than the AT&T iPhone. In fact, I don't think it does. So you've got your network. So if it's not going to be Apple's product, then it's your network. Well, our network's this. And by the way, every time you guys have a commercial about your network, AT&T has a commercial about their network. Who am I supposed to believe? So it really comes down to, it's not about the cheapest price. It's really about, what does it do for me? What are the benefits? So in putting together your brief commercial, those 4 questions that are on your screen right now, I think you need to be able to answer those questions, and you need to make sure that you focus on the benefits. Here's another thing about brief commercials. A shorter brief commercial beats a longer one every day. Your brief commercial needs to be easy to say, easy for you to get out, but more importantly, it needs to be easy to repeat, especially if you're networking. And it seems to me that more and more salespeople are depending on networking for developing leads and referrals than they are doing things like cold calling these days. And it's not like one is better than the other. They're both great. But in networking, and by the way, I do a lot of networking, it's crucial, a very well-crafted brief commercial. And I think, I just walked out of the room, but I'll walk back and look at my computer for a second. Yes, there it is. If you look in the middle of the screen, it says the MicroScript Rules. It's a book I read about 6 or 7 months, actually probably about a year ago now, and it's written by Bill Schley. And he talks about what he calls microscripts. He says that there's no brief commercial that should be longer than 6 words. Now, it's very difficult to get your point across in 6 words, but you can certainly have a tagline that's 6 words. Like if you look at any email that comes from me, under my name, there's a tagline that says measurable and sustainable sales improvement. Measurable and sustainable sales improvement. That's how I describe what I do. I bring about measurable and sustainable sales improvement. Now, why did I come up with that after reading his book? Well, first of all, he said, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is what people remember and can repeat, especially when it comes to networking. So in other words, if I'm in a networking group with 20 or 30 people, what I want is for them to be able to tell everybody who they know what I do. In essence, your networking group or your networking partners become your sales team. They're going to help sell for you, yes?
Absolutely.
So I need them to understand what I do in such a way that they can tell others, but I also need to give them the words. And this is the amazing thing for me. I was working with a coach on a project, and we were sitting and having a meeting in kind of a public place, and somebody walked by who she knew. The guy came over to the table for a few minutes, chatted, walked away, and she said, you know, I wanted to introduce you, but I can never remember how you describe what you do. Now, for years, my brief commercial sounded like this. Jeff Goldberg & Associates is a sales consulting and training firm. We help companies like yours get more appointments with decision makers, shorten your sales cycle, and close more business more profitably. So she says to me, I can never remember what you do. And I said, Diane, you've heard me give my brief commercial 1,000 times. And I said exactly what I just said to you. Jeff Goldberg & Associates is a consulting and training firm. We help companies like yours get more appointments with decision makers, shorten your sales cycle, and close more business more profitably. And she goes, yeah, I can never remember that. And I realized that my brief commercial, even though it very clearly explains what I do and the benefits I bring to the table, so sales, consulting, and training firm, that's feature. Help you get more appointments with decision makers, shorten your sales cycle, and close more business more profitably. Benefit.
Right.
Right. So I'm doing what I'm telling you that you should be doing, except I was doing it in a way that other people could not repeat. So it's beautifully crafted. It wasn't working because the people in my networking group could not repeat it. And that's what this MicroScript Rules book really helped me do, get it down to, and by the way, I still say all those other things that I just told you, but I finish it with, at Jeff Goldberg & Associates, we bring about measurable and sustainable sales improvement. Because what I want is when my networking partners are out at meetings with their clients, I want them to be able to say, oh, you're having a sales problem? I know a guy who brings about measurable and sustainable sales improvement. It's easy to say, it's easy to remember, it's easy to repeat. It's like melts in your mouth, not in your hand. You know what that's for, right?
M&M's.
Yeah, M&M's. When was the last time you actually heard that, though? I don't think they've run that commercial in years and years and years, except we both remember it.
Right. When Reagan was president, I think is when they left.
Yeah, it could be. It could very well be that long, except you and I both remember it. Why? Because it's memorable. Because that little phrase has stuck in our head. Or if the glove doesn't fit, you must have quit at the OJ trial. I mean, everybody knows that. So you want to make it simple because it allows the people who are going to help you, your networking partners, it makes them smarter, and it will make it easier for them to repeat. Okay, so I'm not going to read over this whole thing. When I'm networking, this is my brief commercial. On a sales call, my brief commercial is a little bit longer. Remember we talked about that we're going to transition with, I'm just curious before we get started, we're going to ask them about themselves, and then after our brief, we're going to ask, it would help if I go first, and then we're going to give them our brief commercial. So the brief commercial I use on a sales call is slightly longer than this one I use at networking, but all it's designed to do is to give them some quick information about here's who I am, here's what I do, I'm looking to get some credibility, and then I always end it with, by the way, even though we're not the least expensive option, people choose us because when we leave, their team does get more appointments, does have a shorter sales cycle, and just plain closes more business more profitably. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Good. Okay. I've got 10:15. You're okay till 10:30, right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Good. Okay. So step number 2 is the information gathering phase, and this whole speech has been about how do we transition from the opening and gathering report into the information gathering phase. Now, once we get there, what we want to do is we want to ask questions. Remember, we're going to use softeners to soften the question so that it sounds more conversational and people don't feel like they're being interrogated. But the point becomes, if we're going to ask questions, what questions do we want to ask? What questions do we need to be asking our prospects that are going to help us develop more business? And the questions that I want you and your people to ask, Jeff, just like I ask, are questions that uncover for me what makes sense to my prospect. I have to find out what makes sense. Here's why. We do everything we do because it makes sense. Everything. So you and I are having a conversation on the phone and on the computer right now because it makes sense to you and me to be having this conversation. If it didn't, we wouldn't be doing it, right?
Correct.
Okay, and you told me you're on vacation this week, right?
I am.
Did you have breakfast this morning?
Energy bar, yes.
You had an energy bar. Okay, it didn't make sense to eat breakfast. It made sense to have an energy bar for whatever reason. You didn't want to cook. You weren't that hungry. You needed the energy bar for the protein, whatever it was. I turned down a call from my kid. It made sense to me to continue speaking with you instead of talking to him because I doubted that it was crucial, and I knew I could talk to him later on. It made sense to stick with you instead of talking to my child. After I get done with this call, I've got other things that I'm going to do that all make sense to me. I've got to put together a workbook for a program I'm doing next week, and it makes sense to me to work on that today because if I don't, I can't order the workbooks in time. They'll still get here, but I'm going to have to pay more for shipping, so it makes sense that I'm going to spend the rest of the day finalizing this workbook. We do everything we do because it makes sense, including buy. And our prospects buy because it makes sense too. You with me so far?
I am, very much.
Good. Perfect. So if our prospects buy because it makes sense to buy, then what we need to find out is what makes sense to our prospect. That just sounded confusing in my head. I know that made perfect sense to me. That makes sense. So I'm going to repeat that. If our prospect is going to buy from us because it makes sense to buy from us, then what we need to figure out is what makes sense to the prospect. Does that track for you?
It's not confusing.
Perfect. Good. So the questions we're going to ask are going to be questions that uncover for us what makes sense to the prospect. And what makes sense to your prospect is whatever they're doing now regarding what you have to sell them. In fact, Steve Schiffman used to call that the status quo. What we're looking for is to uncover the status quo, whatever they're doing now regarding what we have to sell them. Because once we know what makes sense to them, in other words, what they're doing now, then we can base our presentation on that. And the way to uncover what makes sense to them, in other words, is to find out whatever they're doing now by simply asking about it. So I'm going to equate it to my world because I understand my world better than I understand your world at this point. So if this was a sales call, I'd be asking you questions like this. So, Jeff, regarding training, how do you train your people now? When somebody new comes on board, do you have an initial training program for them? How about your average performers? What do you do to turn them into superstars? How about your superstars? Do you do anything to make them better, or do you kind of just let them do whatever they want within reason? Have you ever used an outside consultant like me? Who did you use? How did you like them? What didn't you like about them? Why haven't you called you? What was missing from their program? Do you have an internal training department? Why aren't they going to do the training? What were you going to do if I hadn't called you? All these questions, Jeff, And by the way, the overall categories are what do you do and who do you do it with, where do you do it, when do you do it, who do you do it, how do you do it, and why do you do it that way? And of course, what are you trying to accomplish? All these questions asked in different ways will tell you what makes sense to the prospect. And you should base them in both the past, the present, and the future. How have you trained your people in the past? How do you train them now? What are you looking to accomplish moving forward? What would you change about the program if you could? Is this tracking for you, Jeff?
Yeah, it is, and it's funny because it's very much a reflection of ask questions, get sales. A lot of these are in there, believe it or not. I know you said you never read the book, but you guys are on such similar paths. It's great.
Well, look, I worked with the guy for 6 years.
Yeah,
this was one of his big things, finding out what makes sense to the prospect. So, yeah.
No, I agree with you, but what I'm saying is I'd like your spin on it. It's the same, but it's different. It's hard to explain it. In any event, I like it.
Gotcha, great, yeah. So in a conversational manner, those are the kind of questions you want to ask. So what you have to figure out is, what is it that my product or service does for people? And then ask questions about that. So what is it that having cellular phones does for people? Well, obviously, it keeps them in communication. It makes them more productive. It makes them more effective. It keeps them up to date. It's a way that they can communicate more effectively with their customers, their vendors, and their internal staff. So we have to find out how they do that now. So how do you guys communicate with the office or with customers or your staff when you're out? Well, we have cell phones. Oh, really? Which ones are you using now? Why those? Who made the decision to do that? What would you do if you didn't have that? What are you missing that you'd like to have? There's a million questions we could come up with. And by the way, I consider this to be one of the most useful sales meeting exercises that you can possibly do, which is to have salespeople come into a sales meeting and say, the purpose of today's meeting is one purpose and one purpose only. All I want to do is come up with questions. Questions. I want us to come up with questions that are going to help us sell more. And here's how I want to do it. Have we talked about stream of consciousness brainstorming, Jeff?
No.
Okay. So stream of consciousness brainstorming is a particular type of brainstorming which I find to be very effective. In stream of consciousness brainstorming, you set aside a certain amount of time. So I'll just make it up, half an hour. Right. So you walk into a sales meeting with a bunch of salespeople and say, we're going to use stream of consciousness brainstorming today. Actually, let's just equate it to you, and you can certainly do it in sales. You, Jeff, here's what I want you to do. I want you to come up with a list of questions. And I want you to use stream of consciousness brainstorming. So you're going to set aside a certain amount of time. You're going to set 30 minutes aside. And what you're going to do is you're going to put yourself someplace quiet. And the quieter, the better. And then what I want you to do is I want you to clear everything off your desk or your table or wherever you are, and I just want you to have a legal pad and a pen. Now, once you've gotten this quiet place, we're going to ask the question, and I want you to actually ask the question out loud. But before you ask the question, I want you to clear your mind. So if you meditate, spend 2 minutes meditating. If you don't meditate, just spend 2 minutes saying, my mind is clear. I'm only going to focus on one question. Just clear your mind, however you do that. Then, when your mind is clear, we're going to start the 30 minutes, and now you simply ask yourself the question out loud. And here's the question I would want you to ask. If I had an unlimited amount of time with the prospect, and I knew that they would absolutely positively answer every question I had honestly, what questions would I ask? If I knew the customer would give me an unlimited amount of time and would answer every question honestly, what would I ask? And now you take 30 minutes and you simply write down everything that comes to mind and everything that pops into your stream of consciousness. Now here's the thing. In stream of consciousness brainstorming, there's no censorship. So if you ask yourself, if I had unlimited time and I knew that they would answer every question honestly, what question would I ask? And the thought pops into your head, I would ask them, do you think the moon is really made of green cheese? You don't censor and go, that's stupid. You just write it down. No matter what pops into your head, no matter how obscene, no matter how stupid, no matter how outrageous, you just write it down. Because what happens is you're giving your mind permission to be creative. You're giving your mind permission to really expand and really giving it permission to say whatever it wants to. And what I find is when you do this, the closer you get to the limit of your time, in this case it was 30 minutes, we said we were going to ask ourselves these questions for 30 minutes, the closer you get to the end, answers start pouring out, often great ones. You tend to get more and more creative as you get further in the process, especially if you really don't do any censorship whatsoever. Just write down everything. Doesn't matter how stupid. Now, at the end of the 30 minutes, I like to thank the creator, whatever you call him or her, you know, Buddha, Jesus, or whatever you want to call him or her, so I thank, and then I go back over my list. And now I look at all the things that don't make sense, like would I really ask my customer, do you believe the moon is made of green cheese? No, that would never be appropriate on a sales call, so I'm going to cross that one out. After you've crossed out all the crazy stuff, is you should now have a laundry list of questions that you can ask prospects. And the reason I want to have a laundry list of questions is because A, sales is all about asking the right questions and listening to the answers, and B, if I have a laundry list of questions that I could possibly ask, I'm never sitting on a sales call going, damn, what should I ask next? And I used to be that way. I used to be listening to the prospect talk, and in my mind I was going, damn, what am I going to ask next? It's been decades since that's happened to me because I know what questions I want to ask a prospect. In fact, when I'm on the way to a sales call, I do several things, but one of them is I ask myself this question. What information do I need to get today in order to consider this visit successful? What information do I need to get from my prospect today in order to consider this sales call successful? Because once I know what information I need, I know what questions to ask. Does that make sense to you, Chef?
It does.
Good, because it's all about the questions. So what we
I'm
want
actually
to be
going
doing...
to, I'm going to cut you off for a minute. I'm actually going to try this, by the way. I like what you're saying. I'm interested in seeing what happens because I come up with a lot of insanity. I'd like to see what happens in the end when the creative juices start flowing. This is going to be an interesting exercise.
Yeah, man, I'm telling you, and you can use it for anything. Any type of problem that you have, use creative brainstorming or stream of consciousness brainstorming. It's really a very powerful technique, and I'll be interested to hear how that works out for you.
Yeah.
All right, my friend?
You got it.
All right, we've got like 2.5 minutes left, and we're on to the listening phase, and that's going to take more than 2.5 minutes, so I'm going to suggest we cut for the day now.
Sure.
Is there anything I can help you with, anything that you're working on currently that you'd like some coaching on?
No, I mean, so far so good. There will be down the line, I'm sure. I'm going to have a couple of things that I would like to run by you, but I'm almost at that point. I'm not there just yet. The other thing is I still, now that I have time set aside to come up with my business plan piece for you. I have a couple of things I owe you, and I didn't forget about that.
Great, man. Okay, perfect. Okay, so whenever you've got the time for that, that would be great. I'd love to take a look at that and help you put that together. And I've got us down for a week from this Wednesday for the next session, August 22nd. Of course, I'll send you an invitation as always, and we'll pick up right here where we left off at the listening phase next time. In the meantime, please call me, write to me if there's anything I can do. Just send me an email or give me a call. It's my pleasure to help, Jeff.
Well, hey, I really appreciate everything you've done, and please call your son for crying out loud.
I'm going to do that as soon as we hang up, pal. Absolutely. And please enjoy your vacation, bud.
Thanks. I'll catch you later.
All right, man. Have a great one. Bye now.